Tom Fitton, he is the president of Judicial Watch and the author of the book A Republic Under Assault. He has been watching what is going on with the January 6th investigations, and we welcome him to the program. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hey, Glenn. Good to be with you again. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. So you filed a FOIA request, which I didn't think could happen with the Capitol Police. But you wanted to know the internal police documents and what was happening with the Babbitt shooting.
Yeah, well, you know, the Capitol Hill Police getting documents from them is a different kettle of fish and under the law. So one thing we did was we asked the local police here in D.C., the Metropolitan Police Department, for records because they investigated it too. And they gave us 500 pages of records that show kind of what the video shows, which is that there was no, it sounds to me, or looking at the documents, that there was really no credible evidence. Warnings were issued by Lieutenant Byrd, who shot her, and nor was there any reason to shoot her in the sense that she was just crawling through a window. There were other officers around, and no one saw her being armed. No one saw that she was armed because she had nothing in her hand, obviously. So they all saw that, and yet he popped out, shot her, popped back. That's what the documents show. And obviously he was upset after he shot her, whether he was upset because it was a bad shooting or just because it was
he shot somebody
and he reacted badly is another question. But I can tell you this, Glenn, you know, we've been doing this work for a long time at Judicial Watch. You're a keen observer of what goes on with officer-involved shootings. And it's clear to me that Lieutenant Byrd got a pass, either criminally or administratively. Either way, he got a pass in terms of having this shooting swept aside in terms of it being not appropriate. And that's the charitable way of putting it. Other people are accusing him of murder and all sorts of other things. The fact is, this woman posed no imminent threat to him or anyone else around him, and he just shot her outright, and it was a bad shoot. It was a bad shot, a bad shooting. Most police officials who look at this would agree. But because it's political and because she was a Trump supporter, I suspect the media, that's why the media doesn't care and why Pelosi's police department is being held accountable for this woman's unnecessary killing.
Okay, so, you know, I want to give the police the benefit of the doubt. I always try to because I'm not in their situation. However, these guys are supposed to be trained to at least issue warnings. And as I read these documents that you acquired, nobody even knew where, on the inside, on the other side of the door, no one knew where this shot had even come from, right? Where if he would have been issuing warnings, everybody on the inside would have known it was him. If he would have said, stop or I'll shoot, stop or I'll shoot.
Yeah, the only warning people had was they saw his gun pop out from behind the column. And a few folks, based on that video, yelled gun, but she was already at the window. So she was really unable to even do anything, or she didn't see it and just was proceeding. And he panicked and shot her. I don't know how else to describe it. No, there's one witness who says he heard commands being given, but he couldn't remember what they were. So I don't know what was going on there. The government tells us, the police department tells us they may be giving us some video if they get the budget to process them, which is irony above ironies given the budgets here in D.C. and the government.
Well, but, if they just passed the $3.4 trillion.
Maybe we'll get some more info.
Yeah. Now, have you ever seen, in all of your years at Judicial Watch, have you ever seen this kind of situation to where it was a cop shooting and you could not get the video or the information?
No, not in recent memory. Obviously, back in the bad old days, there were some cover-ups of police shootings. You couldn't get basic information for months, if not years. But that's supposed to have changed with the shooting death of George Floyd. But when it came to the shooting death of Ashli Babbitt, a veteran who was unarmed, everyone knew she was unarmed at the time. Both the shooter, Lieutenant Byrd, his name was never disclosed until he came out and disclosed his own name months later. And as I said earlier, these documents aren't being disgorged voluntarily. We had to sue in federal, not in federal court, here in the local court to get access to these records. And right now, Pelosi's Congress is withholding, and we have a separate lawsuit in federal court over this, all of those thousands of hours of video, 14,000 hours of video, which I suspect is a number they threw out there to scare us off from getting them, that they refuse to turn over. We're asking, they said that they're not public records and that the public interest doesn't outweigh the congressional interest in keeping them secret.
I would think it does. I mean,
it's the worst day since 1812. It's
right.
The worst day since 9/11. Yet they don't want to turn over 1 second of video.
I mean, we saw the Zapruder film. We can't see this.
So, ironically, we'll have to get the records. It looks like we'll get some video that may or may not be new from the D.C. police. But Nancy Pelosi's police stands like a stone wall against transparency on the shooting death of not only Ashli Babbitt, but the events that transpired on that day generally.
How did our founders miss this with the Capitol Police, or did they have this back then? How is it that this is basically a private police force that has no oversight at all from anyone but the people who are running it?
Well, it's wonderful. The law is wonderful. The founders didn't miss it in the sense that the public has a common law right to public access to government records. And it's a common law right. And, by that, the courts say this is a right that predates the Constitution. We forget the civil liberties enshrined in the Constitution. They're not rights created by the government. They're ones that they are kind of highlighting. They're rights that we have separately and apart from the Constitution that the Constitution specifically protects. But the right to access to government documents, we don't need a FOIA law per se to get access to those records. And that's what we're fighting about in federal court. And I think the courts are leaning in our direction. And the argument's going to be what's a public record versus what isn't, which is what Nancy Pelosi's Congress is doing.
It's interesting.
They've got this commission going on, and no one's doing an investigation of what happened that day other than Judicial Watch. They're just targeting people complaining about the election and threatening them with jail. That's what they're doing.
Is it true that that people are being held in solitary confinement? I've heard that over and over again.
For their protection.
Yeah.
And to deal with COVID. I mean, that's the excuse, but that's my understanding of it as well. And at least, one judge wants to know what went on there, Judge Royce Lamberth, who's a federal judge here in the District of Columbia. But, none of that. Look, we saw this with Trump, and now we're seeing it with his supporters. The civil rights of the wrong wrong type of political person are not to be protected. And the law does not govern the handling of their cases in a way that would govern the handling of cases sympathetic to the establishment.
The DOJ, Biden says they should prosecute former Trump officials that defy any of the subpoenas. And the Trump administration says that they have administrative rights here. They can keep people from having to testify. Who's right on this?
Well, Biden isn't right in the sense that he's trying to short circuit the process to get to a criminal contempt. You've got to really be in contempt in the sense that a court has overruled your objections to a subpoena and you're still refusing to comply. But the idea that you can't object to a subpoena, require or ignore an administrative subpoena, which requires the other side to go to court to enforce it administratively and through the civil court process. Here, though, the Pelosi Congress and Biden's implying if you object to a subpoena, we're going to put you in jail. And that's not right. And, that's the Putin approach to enforcing subpoenas. It's not the way we do it in our republic. And that's why the Justice Department even had to issue a statement saying, whoa, we don't necessarily rush there to do a criminal prosecution without serious consideration. And I'm highlighting what needs to be seriously considered. Steve Bannon, for instance, has the rights under our Constitution to ignore and object to a subpoena the way they would go is that the Congress would seek to enforce the subpoena civilly. And if those efforts, should they win, are still refused or rejected by Bannon, then they could pursue contempt proceedings.
Are you concerned about the fact that the Capitol Police now are getting spying device from the Pentagon that allows to track people for weeks, and that looks like they're moving into more of an intelligence gathering operation and moving out to Miami and then moving out also to Los Angeles? I mean, it's the Capitol Police. That's what the FBI is supposed to do, not the Capitol Police.
Well, the FBI doesn't do that very well either.
Right.
So now we're going to have a federal agency, a federal law enforcement agency, one that's run by lying incompetence in the executive branch, and we'll just have a separate law enforcement agency run by lying incompetence in the legislative branch. I don't know about you, but I don't want to pick either of those poisons.
Tom, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was great, by the way, to be down with you in Florida. You have a great group of supporters.
Yeah, thank you for presenting there and your work. And I'll say it for all your listeners again, you're a patriot and a humanitarian in a way the left refuses to acknowledge. And your leadership on that has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch and the author of A Republic Under Assault. If it wasn't for people like Tom and his group, we wouldn't know a lot of things that are true that we know now. Because they are relentless on getting the files and the information out from secrecy and into the light.